Who invented American breakfast cereal? Why did we get addicted? Was it really about health, or was something stranger happening in those Victorian kitchens? How did a religious movement's attempt to suppress human desires end up creating one of America's most desired morning rituals? And why, after all we've learned about nutrition, do we still reach for that colorful box every morning? Those first experimental batches would have horrified your taste buds, deliberately bland, purposefully joyless, designed to calm what their creators believed were dangerous human passions. The original cereal makers actually thought that flavor itself was a form of sin. This peculiar journey will reveal how religious visions, sibling rivalries, and accidental kitchen mishaps created an industry worth billions. As the story unfolds, you might notice your breathing getting deeper, your thoughts growing quieter, settling into that peaceful state where even the strangest histories feel like gentle bedtime tales. Subscribing helps you catch more of these unusual stories from the past. Completely up to you though, whatever helps you unwind. Share your breakfast guilty pleasure in the comments, or tell me if you're team cereal or team skip breakfast entirely. Always curious to know. Let's get you comfortable first. Maybe adjust that blanket. Find that perfect position where your neck feels supported. Dim any harsh lights around you. Tonight's tale begins in a world where every spoonful of breakfast was supposed to save your soul. The year is 1863, and you're standing in Battle Creek, Michigan. Population, barely 3,000 souls. The Civil War is tearing the country apart, but here in this quiet Midwestern settlement, a completely different kind of battle is about to begin. One that would ultimately determine what millions of Americans would pour into their bowls every single morning. You might not realize it yet, but this unremarkable town is about to become ground zero for a health revolution. See, Battle Creek has just become the headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a religious group with very specific ideas about the relationship between food and salvation. Their spiritual leader, Ellen G. White, claimed to receive divine visions, actual revelations from God, about what humans should and shouldn't eat. According to these visions, meat was corrupting the soul, stimulating foods led directly to self-abuse, and the path to heaven quite literally ran through the stomach. Her followers didn't see these as mere suggestions. They believed these were divine commands. The Adventists viewed the human body as a temple, and evidence suggests most Americans were defiling theirs with every single meal. Now, the context here matters enormously. The 1860s were a time of incredible anxiety about health and morality. The Industrial Revolution had created new urban centers, filled with what reformers saw as dangerous temptations. Immigration was rapidly changing the cultural landscape. Medical science, as we understand it today, barely existed. Doctors were still prescribing mercury for various ailments. Cocaine for toothaches and bloodletting remained a common treatment. Into this medical chaos stepped the health reformers, and Battle Creek's Adventists were among the most organized. They believed that physical health and spiritual purity were completely inseparable, that your diet determined not just your well-being in this life, but your eternal destination. Historians debate whether this was progressive thinking or religious extremism, but the impact was undeniable. The Adventists established the Western Health Reform Institute in 1866, right there in Battle Creek. Initially just a 2-story farmhouse, room for maybe a dozen patients. But it represented something revolutionary. According to medical historians, a facility that treated disease through diet and lifestyle rather than drugs and surgery. Though whether it actually worked remains a matter of scholarly debate. The Institute's early prescriptions were, let's say, austere. Patients were limited to 2 meals a day. Supper was considered dangerous. The diet consisted mainly of graham bread, fruits, vegetables, and enormous quantities of water. Meat, tea, coffee, alcohol, tobacco, and spices were absolutely forbidden. Even salt was viewed with suspicion. The reasoning? These substances allegedly inflamed the passions, particularly the sexual ones. Here's something that might surprise you. Victorian Americans were absolutely obsessed with the supposed dangers of masturbation. Medical journals published what they considered serious research linking it to everything from blindness to insanity. Parents purchased restraining devices for their children. Honestly, the whole thing reads like satire now, but this cultural hysteria shaped everything, including what people ate for breakfast. The health reformers believed, or at least claimed to believe, that bland, unstimulating foods could control these urges. Sylvester Graham, inventor of the graham cracker, had been preaching this gospel since the 1830s. His followers, the Grahamites, insisted that whole wheat bread and vegetarian diets could cure both disease and sin. Evidence suggests they were wrong about the sin part, but they might have been onto something with the whole grains. Battle Creek's religious community embraced these ideas completely. They weren't just changing diet, they were attempting to redesign human nature itself. Every meal became a moral choice, every bite a step toward or away from redemption. The pressure must have been exhausting, sitting down to breakfast knowing your eternal soul might depend on avoiding that piece of bacon. The Institute grew slowly at first, treating perhaps 100 patients in its first year. Most were Adventists seeking purification, but word began to spread about their unusual methods. The water treatments, the exercise programs, the strange vegetarian meals. Some patients claimed miraculous recoveries, though medical records from the period are frustratingly incomplete. Others fled after a few days of graham crackers and cold baths. Something significant was happening in Battle Creek, though, something that would eventually transform the American breakfast table. The Adventists were systematically experimenting with grain-based foods, attempting to create palatable alternatives to meat. They were essentially running an accidental laboratory for breakfast innovation, though they certainly didn't see it that way. By 1876, the Institute needed new leadership, someone with actual medical training, someone who could give their religious dietary beliefs a scientific foundation. They found their man in a young Adventist doctor, fresh from medical school. His name was John Harvey Kellogg, and he was about to turn Battle Creek into the strangest, most influential food laboratory in American history. This zealous young doctor, with his peculiar theories about digestion and morality, would soon accidentally invent a product that would fill billions of bowls. But that discovery was still almost 2 decades away. First, Kellogg had to build his empire, transform the modest institute into his grand sanitarium. The patients who would soon arrive, wealthy industrialists and their nervous wives, had no idea they were about to become test subjects in one of history's most successful accidental food experiments. They came seeking cures for their various ailments. They would leave having tasted the future, even if that future did taste remarkably like cardboard, at least at first. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg was 24 years old when he took over the Western Health Reform Institute, and immediately he had bigger plans. Much bigger. This wasn't going to be some modest farmhouse operation anymore. Kellogg envisioned a medical palace, a sanitarium. He even coined that specific term, combining sanitary and sanatorium to emphasize cleanliness and healing. By 1878, Kellogg had transformed the institute completely. The new Battle Creek Sanitarium could accommodate hundreds of patients, featured the latest medical equipment, electric light baths, mechanical horses, vibrating chairs, devices that seem absurd now but represented cutting-edge technology. Patients paid up to $25 per week, equivalent to roughly $800 today. This was healthcare for the wealthy, the anxious, the chronically constipated elite of the Gilded Age. The sanitarium, or the San as patients called it, became America's most fashionable health resort. John D. Rockefeller Jr. stayed there. So did Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Amelia Earhart, President Taft, who desperately needed to lose weight. These weren't just patients. They were experimental subjects in Kellogg's grand laboratory of dietary reform, though they probably didn't realize it at the time. Kellogg himself was, how do I put this delicately, an interesting character. He dressed entirely in white, changed his clothes multiple times daily, took 5 enemas every morning, yes, 5, and conducted surgery wearing white kid gloves instead of rubber ones. He adopted dozens of children, but never consummated his own marriage, believing that sex depleted vital energy. Some historians suggest he might have been asexual. Others think he was simply obsessed with purity to an extreme degree. His theories about digestion were equally peculiar. Kellogg believed that virtually all disease originated in the bowels, that auto-intoxication from rotting food in the intestines poisoned the entire body. The solution? Yogurt enemas, electric belly massages, and most importantly, a diet that would pass through the system quickly and cleanly. This meant vegetables, fruits, nuts, and especially specially prepared grains. The sanitarium's kitchens became Kellogg's experimental laboratory. He employed a team of cooks and food scientists, constantly developing new grain-based foods. They created granola, though not the sweet clustered version we know today. Kellogg's granola was rock-hard baked wheat and oat chunks. Patients regularly broke teeth on it. One guest supposedly said it was like eating gravel, but Kellogg insisted the chewing was good for digestion. Then there was caramel coffee, made from burned bread crusts and molasses. Protos, a meat substitute made from wheat gluten and peanuts. And something called natos, which despite its unfortunate name, was essentially an early nut butter. Most of these creations tasted exactly as appetizing as they sound, which is to say, not very. The Sands dining room was an experience unto itself. Patients sat at long tables while Kellogg lectured about the dangers of meat, the evils of condiments, the importance of thorough mastication. That's chewing. He insisted every bite be chewed at least 32 times, once for each tooth. Musicians played dinner music specifically chosen to aid digestion, marches for the main course, waltzes for dessert, though given the food. I'm not sure how much the music helped. Kellogg's younger brother. Well, Keith Kellogg worked at the sanitarium too, but in a very different capacity. Where John Harvey was the visionary doctor, the charismatic leader, Will was the bookkeeper, the business manager, the one who actually kept the place running. He worked 18-hour days, managed the staff, balanced the budgets, and increasingly helped with the food experiments. The relationship between the brothers was complicated. John Harvey was 8 years older, had paid for Will's education, and treated him more like an employee than a sibling. Will signed his letters to his brother, "Your obedient servant," received a modest salary despite essentially running the entire business side, and watched his older brother take credit for everything. Resentment was building, though it would take years to explode. In the early 1890s, the pressure to create better-tasting health foods intensified. Competitors were emerging. Other sanitariums were opening. The San needed something special, something that would set it apart. John Harvey became obsessed with creating a digestible bread substitute, something that could be eaten by patients with dental problems, the elderly, those with sensitive stomachs. The kitchen experiments grew more intense. They tried boiling wheat, baking it, grinding it, mixing it with various ingredients. Nothing quite worked. The results were either too hard, too mushy, or simply inedible. Will often stayed late into the night, helping with these experiments, though his brother rarely acknowledged his contributions. Evidence suggests the brothers were experimenting with boiled wheat dough in 1894. The exact details remain somewhat disputed among food historians, but the general story goes like this. A batch of cooked wheat was left standing longer than intended. Some accounts say it was forgotten overnight. Others suggest it was deliberate, trying to see what would happen. When they ran this slightly fermented wheat through rollers, expecting the usual sticky mess, something different happened. Instead of forming a paste, The wheat broke into thin flakes, individual pieces that could be baked until crispy. It was an accident, or perhaps a fortunate mistake, but the brothers immediately recognized they'd discovered something important. These flakes were light, crispy, digestible. Everything their patients needed. Well, everything except flavor, but that would come later. The process took months to perfect. The wheat had to be cooked just right, left to condition for the proper amount of time, rolled at exactly the correct pressure. Too wet and it wouldn't flake. Too dry and it would crumble. Temperature mattered. Humidity mattered. Even the type of wheat mattered. Will kept meticulous notes, documenting every variable, every experiment. By 1895, they had it figured out. Granos, they called it, the world's first flaked cereal. Patients at the stand tried it first. Reactions were mixed. Some found it innovative, others thought it tasted like paper. But it was definitely easier to eat than the tooth-breaking granola. And when served with milk and a bit of fruit, it was almost palatable. John Harvey saw granos as a health food, pure and simple. Another tool in his medical arsenal against auto-intoxication and moral decay. He had no interest in commercializing it beyond the sanitarium's patients. But Will saw something different. He saw a product that could be manufactured, packaged, sold to the masses. He saw a business opportunity. The brothers filed a patent in 1895, started small-scale production, selling mainly through mail order to former patients. But they fundamentally disagreed about the future. John Harvey wanted to keep it medicinal, educational, pure. Will wanted to make it taste better, market it aggressively, build an empire. This philosophical divide would eventually tear them apart, but not quite yet. Meanwhile, one of the sanitarium's patients was paying very close attention to these wheat flake experiments. His name was C.W. Post, and he'd come to Battle Creek desperately ill, or at least claiming to be. He spent months at the SAN, observing everything, asking questions, taking mental notes. Post was about to become the Kellogg brothers' worst nightmare and biggest competitor. He'd seen what they created, and he was already planning how to do it better, how to make it profitable, how to turn health food into big business. The wheat flakes were just the beginning, but they weren't selling particularly well. Patients tolerated them. Former patients ordered them occasionally, but this was hardly a revolution. The real breakthrough, the one that would change breakfast forever, came when the Kellogg brothers turned their attention to corn. Corn was cheaper than wheat, more abundant, and according to some accounts, Will had been quietly experimenting with it on his own time. The process should have been similar. Cook the corn, let it condition, run it through the rollers. But corn behaved differently than wheat. It was oilier, stickier, more temperamental. The first attempts produced a gummy mess that stuck to everything. The rollers, the pans, probably the ceiling if they weren't careful. The breakthrough came sometime in 1898, though the exact date remains unclear. The brothers discovered that adding malt flavoring to the corn, just a touch, helped with the flaking process. It also added something else, actual flavor. Not much, but compared to the wheat flakes, these corn flakes almost tasted like food. Still bland by modern standards, but revolutionary for the sanitarium. Now here's where the story gets complicated and where historians still argue about what really happened. John Harvey Kellogg maintained that cornflakes, like all sanitarium foods, should remain pure, unsweetened, medicinal. He believed that bland foods decreased sexual desire, that they literally cooled the passions. Some scholars suggest this theory came from his medical training. Others think it reflected his religious upbringing. Probably it was both. The supposed connection between diet and sexual desire wasn't unique to Kellogg. Victorian medical literature is filled with warnings about stimulating foods. Meat allegedly increased lustful thoughts. Spices inflamed the passions. Even eggs were considered risky. One medical text from 1887 claimed that eggs should not be given to young people of amorous temperament. I mean, imagine being denied scrambled eggs because someone thought you looked too flirty. Kellogg took these theories to extremes. He recommended cold water enemas to reduce arousal, prescribed carbolic acid to the clitoris for girls who touched themselves, circumcised boys without anesthetic as punishment for masturbation. These weren't fringe practices. Many doctors of the era endorsed similar treatments, though evidence suggests they were about as effective as you'd expect, which is to say, they just traumatized people. The cornflakes fit perfectly into this anti-passion philosophy. They were intentionally bland, deliberately unstimulating, designed to start the day without any excitement whatsoever. Kellogg wrote that a breakfast of cornflakes and milk would reduce the animal passions, promote clear thinking, and encourage moral behavior. Whether anyone actually became more moral from eating cornflakes, well, that's highly debatable. Well, Keith Kellogg had different ideas entirely. He didn't care about suppressing anyone's passions. He cared about selling cereal, and he knew that the bland cornflakes, while acceptable to sanitarium patients who had no choice, would never appeal to the general public. People wanted food that tasted good, even at breakfast. Revolutionary concept. I know. The tension between the brothers intensified. Will wanted to add sugar to the cornflakes, make them more palatable, more marketable. John Harvey was horrified. Sugar was a stimulant. It excited the system, promoted decay both dental and moral. They fought about it constantly. These arguments supposedly got so heated that staff would flee the room. Meanwhile, the Kellogg food products were attracting attention beyond Battle Creek. Patents are public documents, and other entrepreneurs were studying them carefully. Some former patients started their own health food companies, using barely disguised variations of Kellogg recipes. The brothers tried to maintain control, but it was like trying to hold water in their hands. By 1902, Battle Creek had 42 different cereal companies. 42 in a town of less than 20,000 people. The place was absolutely mad for cereal. Streets were lined with cereal factories. The air smelled like toasted grain. Local newspapers ran ads for Triabita, Grano, Malt 2, Cero Fritto. Names that sound like someone was just making up words, which, honestly, they probably were. Most of these companies failed within a year or two. Their products were terrible, their marketing worse. But a few persisted, and one in particular was thriving. C.W. Post's Postum Cereal Company, founded by that former sanitarium patient, was selling something called grape nuts. Made from wheat and barley, no grapes, no nuts. The name made no sense, but Post was a marketing genius. Post had learned something crucial during his time at the sanitarium. People didn't really want health food. They wanted to believe they were eating health food. There's a difference, a profitable difference. He marketed grape nuts as brain food, claimed it cured everything from malaria to consumption. Used scientific-sounding language that meant absolutely nothing. Diastase develops in the malted barley. Sure, whatever sells breakfast. Well, Kellogg watched Post's success with increasing frustration. Here was a former patient, using ideas developed at the sanitarium, making a fortune. Wawel worked 18-hour days, earned a modest salary, and took orders from his older brother. The resentment was becoming unbearable. The breaking point came in 1901. Will had been experimenting with a new flaking process, working late as usual, when he made a significant improvement to the cornflake recipe. He excitedly told John Harvey, who promptly took credit for it in a medical journal. No mention of Will, no acknowledgement of his contributions. Just another Kellogg invention by the famous Dr. Kellogg. Will started keeping separate notes. Secret experiments. He'd work on the official sanitarium products during the day, then stay late to try his own variations. Adding a touch more malt here, adjusting the cooking temperature there. And yes, secretly adding sugar, just to see what would happen. The results were immediately obvious. The sweetened flakes actually tasted good. By 1905, Will had made his decision. He was 45 years old, had worked for his brother for 25 years, and had nothing to show for it except exhaustion and bitterness. He approached John Harvey with a proposition. Let him take the cornflake recipe commercial, form a proper company, market it to the masses. John Harvey reluctantly agreed, but with conditions. His name would be on the company, the Kellogg Sanitarium Food Company, and the cornflakes would remain pure, unsweetened, medicinal. Will agree to the conditions, at least outwardly, but he was already planning his rebellion. In February 1906, while John Harvey was traveling in Europe, Will made his move. He added sugar to the cornflakes, started an aggressive advertising campaign, gave away free samples, millions of them. The sweetened cornflakes were an immediate hit. Orders poured in faster than they could fill them. The factory ran 24 hours a day. When John Harvey returned and discovered what Will had done, the confrontation was explosive. Witnesses described shouting that could be heard throughout the building. John Harvey threatened legal action. Will threaten to expose certain sanitarium practices that might interest regulators. The brothers would barely speak again for the rest of their lives. The split was complete, permanent, and it would reshape the breakfast industry forever. C.W. Post was dying when he arrived at the Battle Creek Sanitarium in 1891. Or at least that's what he told everyone. Chronic stomach pain, nervous exhaustion, unable to work. His wife wheeled him around in a wheelchair, though staff members later recalled seeing him walk perfectly fine when he thought no one was watching. Post spent 9 months at the San, observing everything, and according to some accounts, he left feeling worse than when he arrived. But Post hadn't wasted his time. He'd studied Kellogg's methods, tasted every experimental food, watched the cooking processes through kitchen windows, taken notes on the business model. Most importantly, he'd recognized something the Kellogg brothers had missed. People desperately wanted to believe in miracle cures, and they'd pay handsomely for that belief. In 1892, Post opened his own health retreat in Battle Creek, La Vida Inn, offering a suspiciously similar program to the sanitarium: mental healing, dietary reform, positive thinking. But Post added something Kellogg never would: showmanship. He claimed he could cure patients through mental suggestion, held theatrical healing sessions, promised miracles. The medical establishment called him a quack, but patients didn't care. They felt better, or at least they thought they did. Post's real genius emerged in 1895 when he created Postum, a coffee substitute made from roasted wheat and molasses. The product itself was unremarkable. Similar grain-based coffee alternatives already existed, but Post's marketing was revolutionary. He didn't just advertise Postum. He launched a war against coffee itself. Lost eyesight through coffee drinking, screamed one advertisement. Coffee causes rheumatism, declared another. Post claimed coffee was basically poison, causing everything from divorce to poverty. He invented testimonials from satisfied customers. Mr. Jackson of Tennessee reports complete recovery from coffee neuralgia. These people probably didn't exist, but newspapers printed the ads anyway. Truth in advertising laws wouldn't come for decades. The advertising budget was enormous. Post spent almost $1 million in 1898 alone, roughly $30 million in today's money, on a product that cost pennies to make. He bought entire newspaper pages, plastered billboards across the country, sent free samples to every household he could reach. Marketing expenses exceeded production costs by 10 to 1. Everyone thought he was insane until the money started rolling in. Postum made Post rich, but grape nuts made him a millionaire. Introduced in 1897, this dense, crunchy cereal was another wheat and barley creation, baked until it was hard as rocks. Post claimed the baking process turned starch into grape sugar, hence grape, and it was crunchy like nuts, hence nuts. Complete nonsense scientifically, but it sounded convincing. The health claims for grape nuts were even more outrageous than Postum. Post advertised it as a cure for appendicitis, malaria, consumption, and loose teeth. He claimed it would make children grow taller, increase brain power, prevent criminal behavior. One ad literally stated, "Grape nuts prevent insanity." The Federal Trade Commission would later call these dangerously misleading, but that was years away. Post understood something fundamental about American consumers. They didn't want to be sick, but more importantly, they wanted to believe they were improving themselves. Every bowl of grape nuts was an investment in their future, their health, their success. He wasn't selling cereal. He was selling transformation, aspiration, the American dream in a box. The advertising copy was pure genius or pure manipulation, depending on your perspective. "There's a reason" became Post's slogan, appearing on every package, every advertisement. It meant nothing and everything. A reason you felt better, a reason you succeeded, a reason to keep buying. Post never explained what the reason was. He didn't need to. Consumers filled in their own hopes. By 1900, the Postum cereal company was earning $2 million annually. Post built a massive factory complex in Battle Creek, hired hundreds of workers. His success attracted even more cereal entrepreneurs to the city. Battle Creek's population doubled, then tripled, all chasing the cereal gold rush that Post had proven possible. Post's marketing techniques influenced everyone, including Kellogg, who was watching, learning, seething with frustration. Here was proof that cereal could be big business, huge business, if marketed correctly. Post had no medical degree, no sanitarium, no decades of experience, just audacity and advertising. And he was winning. The rivalry between Post and the Kellogg's became personal. Post ran ads mocking the sanitarium's methods. The Kellogg's published articles questioning Post's ethics. Post hired away sanitarium employees, offering double wages. The Kellogg's tried to sue for patent infringement, but Post's recipes were just different enough. Battle Creek became a battlefield, with cereal as the weapon. Post's innovations went beyond advertising. He was among the first to understand brand loyalty, packaging design, shelf placement. He made Grape Nuts boxes distinctive, bright yellow with bold lettering, visible from across the store. He paid grocers for premium shelf space, eye level, end caps. He created recipe books, showing dozens of ways to eat grape nuts, most of them terrible, but that wasn't the point. The production methods were equally innovative. Post mechanized everything possible, reducing costs, increasing output. He could produce cereal at a fraction of the sanitarium's cost, sell it for less, and still make enormous profits. The Kellogg's were still making cereal like medicine, carefully, precisely, slowly. Post was making it like money, fast, cheap, and in massive quantities. But Post's greatest innovation might have been his approach to truth, or rather, his complete disregard for it. When criticized for false advertising, He responded that the public was educated to accept exaggeration. When doctors challenged his health claims, he accused them of conspiracy. When competitors copied his methods, he simply outspent them, drowning their voices in a flood of advertising. By 1910, Post was one of the richest men in America, worth over $20 million. His daughter Marjorie would later become the wealthiest woman in America. Post built an entire town in Texas, Post City, still there today. He owned yachts, estates, art collections, all from roasted wheat and outrageous lies. The irony was that Post never really recovered his health. Despite all his miracle cures and positive thinking, he suffered from chronic pain, severe depression, paranoid delusions. In 1914, he wrote a farewell note, drove to his hunting lodge, and shot himself. He was 59 years old. The man who sold health and happiness couldn't find either for himself. But his company survived, thrived, eventually became General Foods, then part of Kraft. The marketing template he created, emotional manipulation, health claims, lifestyle aspiration, became the foundation of food advertising. Every cereal commercial you've ever seen, with its promises of energy, vitality, success, traces back to C.W. Post and his shameless genius. Well, Kellogg learned these lessons well, perhaps too well. When he finally broke free from his brother in 1906, he didn't just copy Post's methods. He perfected them, made them even more powerful, more persuasive, more profitable. The cereal wars were about to get serious. Well, Kellogg's rebellion started quietly, almost secretly. In 1906, while his brother was in Europe, he didn't just add sugar to the cornflakes. He fundamentally reimagined what cereal could be. Not medicine, not moral guidance, just food that people actually wanted to eat. The first batches of sweetened cornflakes flew off the shelves. Orders came in faster than the small sanitarium factory could handle. Will knew he'd found something. The sugar wasn't much by today's standards, just a light coating, maybe 2% by weight. But compared to the austere original recipe, it was revolutionary. Customers wrote letters saying things like, "Finally, a health food that doesn't taste like punishment." Though historical records indicate many were adding their own sugar anyway. Will just made it official. John Harvey was furious when he returned. The confrontation was so intense that employees reportedly hid in other rooms. "You've destroyed everything," John Harvey allegedly shouted. "You've turned medicine into candy." Will's response, according to witness accounts, was simply, "Good, candy sells." The philosophical divide was unbridgeable. One brother wanted to save souls. The other wanted to build an empire. By 1909, Will had forced his brother out entirely, buying the rights to the Kellogg name for cereal products. The Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company was his alone, and he immediately dropped sanitarium from everything. No more medical pretensions, no more moral lectures, just breakfast, sweet, crunchy, profitable breakfast. But sugar was only the beginning of Will's transformation. He studied Post's success obsessively, analyzing every advertisement, every marketing campaign, every sales figure he could obtain. Post had proven that emotional manipulation worked. Will decided to perfect it, make it scientific, systematic, unstoppable. The first major innovation was the signature. Will started putting W.K. Kellogg on every box in his own handwriting, later standardized as a printed signature. It was brilliant psychology. A personal guarantee, like a letter from a friend. Customers felt they knew Will personally, trusted him. Some actually wrote him letters as if he were their neighbor, asking for advice about their marriages, their children, their digestive problems. The archives still contain hundreds of these personal appeals. Then came the massive sampling campaigns. Will gave away 4 million packages in 1909 alone. Per million. He'd take out full-page newspaper ads with coupons. Free box of Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Grocers complained about the crowds, the chaos, but they couldn't deny the results. Once people tried the sweetened flakes, they kept buying them. The advertising budget was staggering. Will spent almost $1 million in 1911, at a time when a nice house cost $2,000. He hired the best illustrators, the cleverest copywriters, the most aggressive salesmen. One ad showed a desperate housewife crying, "My husband doesn't love my cooking." The solution? Serve Kellogg's Corn Flakes. No cooking required, no disappointment possible. Manipulative? Absolutely. Effective? The sales figures suggest it was. Will understood something his brother never could. Convenience was more powerful than conviction. American women were exhausted, managing households without modern appliances, cooking 3 meals daily from scratch, cleaning without vacuum cleaners, washing without machines. Corn Flakes offered 10 minutes of freedom every morning. 10 precious minutes to sit, breathe, exist without labor. The packaging evolved constantly. Will tested different colors, fonts, images. He discovered that red and green attracted attention, that pictures of the actual cereal increased sales, that words like crispy and delicious worked better than nutritious and wholesome. Every decision was based on sales data, not ideology, not health theory, just pure capitalism. By 1912, Kellogg's was spending more on advertising than any other food company in America. The ads appeared everywhere: newspapers, magazines, billboards, streetcars. Will even hired planes to skywrite Kellogg's over cities, likely the first aerial food advertising in history. People had never seen anything like it. Breakfast cereal promoted like a presidential campaign. The competition with Post intensified. Both companies spied on each other, hired away key employees, rushed to copy successful products. When Post introduced Post Toasties, a cornflake competitor, Will responded with massive price cuts, giving away millions more samples, outspending Post 2-to-1 on advertising. The grocery stores became battlegrounds. with sales representatives literally fighting for shelf space. But Will's masterstroke came in 1913. He discovered that adding malt, not just as a processing aid, but as a flavor element, created an almost addictive quality. The malt interacted with the sugar and corn to produce something food scientists now call supernormal stimulus, a flavor more intense than anything found in nature. It triggered reward pathways in the brain, created cravings, ensured repeat purchases. The science wasn't understood at the time, but Will could see the results. Customers who tried the new formula bought more frequently, in larger quantities. They reported needing their cornflakes, feeling unsatisfied without them. Some families were going through a box every 2 days, spending more on cereal than on meat. Contemporary accounts describe it as the first must-have breakfast food. Children were especially susceptible. The combination of sweetness, crunch, and malt flavoring appealed to their developing palates. Parents noticed their children requesting Kellogg's specifically, refusing other brands, throwing tantrums in grocery stores. Will had accidentally discovered what modern neuroscientists call hedonic hunger, wanting food not for nutrition, but for pleasure. Though, of course, nobody called it that in 1913. The health claims gradually disappeared from Kellogg's advertising, replaced by lifestyle imagery. Happy families around breakfast tables. Successful businessmen starting their day the Kellogg way. Beautiful women maintaining their figures with light, digestible cornflakes. The message shifted from "this will cure your disease" to "this is what successful people eat." World War I actually helped Kellogg's grow. The government needed shelf-stable foods for troops. Cereal was perfect, lightweight, nutritious enough, didn't spoil. Kellogg's got massive military contracts, introduced thousands of soldiers to cornflakes. These men came home with a taste for convenient breakfast and the money to afford it. Some historians argue this military exposure was crucial to cereal's mainstream acceptance. By 1920, Kellogg's was the largest cereal company in the world. Will was worth millions. His brother's sanitarium was struggling, still serving unsweetened health foods to a dwindling clientele. The sugar had won, convenience had triumphed. And breakfast in America would never be the same. But the real transformation was just beginning. Will had proven that cereal could be big business. Now other companies wanted in. The sugar content would climb, the marketing would get more aggressive, and the target audience would get younger, much younger. The innocent-looking cornflake had opened a door that couldn't be closed. The age of sugar cereal was dawning, and nobody yet understood just how sweet things were about to get. The children were always the real target. The companies just took a while to admit it. By the late 1940s, cereal executives had discovered something remarkable. Children influenced roughly 40% of family food purchases, not by shopping themselves, but through what marketers delicately called persuasion techniques, also known as whining, begging, and throwing fits in grocery store aisles. Television changed everything. When TVs entered American homes in the early 1950s, cereal companies saw their opportunity. Children's programming was cheap to sponsor, parents used TV as a babysitter, and young minds were magnificently susceptible to suggestion. The first animated cereal commercial aired in 1952. Within 5 years, cartoon characters were selling more cereal than doctors ever had. Tony the Tiger arrived in 1952, and he was perfect. Anthropologists who study advertising note that Tony combined parental authority. He was adult-sized, with childhood playfulness. He said they're great, with such enthusiasm that kids believed him. Had to believe him. A tiger wouldn't lie, would he? The voice actor, Thurl Ravenscroft, later said he received fan mail from children asking if Tony was his real friend. The psychological manipulation was deliberate, though companies wouldn't admit it for decades. Internal documents from the period, released during later lawsuits, reveal extensive research into children's psychology. What colors attracted them, red and yellow? What shapes they trusted, round and soft? What promises motivated them? Fun, power, belonging. Every element was calculated. Snap, Crackle, and Pop joined the party in 1953, though they'd existed in advertising since the 1930s. The TV animation brought them to life. 3 tiny elves who lived in your cereal bowl, making music just for you. Children would lean close to their bowls, listening for the sounds, believing the elves were really there. Some parents reported their kids trying to save the elves from drowning in milk. That's either adorable or disturbing, depending on your perspective. The Trix Rabbit debuted in 1959 with his eternal struggle. Silly rabbit. Tricks are for kids. It was genius marketing disguised as entertainment. Children felt special, exclusive. Tricks belonged to them alone, not to adults, not even to the rabbit who desperately wanted them. The psychological hook was powerful. Kids were in control. They had something others wanted, even if it was just colorful corn puffs. By 1960, Saturday morning had become a 3-hour commercial for cereal, disguised as cartoons. The FCC wouldn't regulate children's advertising for another decade, so companies went wild. Characters pitched their cereals directly. Hey kids, tell your mom to buy. They created entire shows around cereals. Linus the Lion-Hearted was literally a show about post-cereal mascots, living together, having adventures, selling sugar. The prizes inside boxes became crucial weapons. Decoder rings, toy submarines, miniature license plates. Free inside, the boxes screamed, though of course nothing was free. The cost was built into the price. Children would beg for specific cereals just for the prizes, eating bowls of sugar to get to the plastic treasure faster. One mother wrote to Kellogg's in 1961 complaining that her son had opened 6 boxes looking for a specific toy, dumping the cereal into containers. The company sent her coupons for more boxes. Captain Crunch sailed into view in 1963. created by a young advertising executive named Jay Ward, who also created Rocky and Bullwinkle. The good captain wasn't just a mascot. He had a whole world, a ship called the Guppy, a crew of children, adventures on the Milk Sea, islands made of crunch. Kids didn't just eat Captain Crunch. They joined his crew, participated in his adventures, became part of his world. The texture innovations were just as calculated as the characters. Captain Crunch was engineered to remain crunchy and milk longer than competitors, using a special oil coating process. It also, as many kids discovered, could shred the roof of your mouth like tiny sugar-coated razors. Complaints poured in, but sales kept climbing. Apparently mild oral injury was acceptable if the cereal tasted good enough. Lucky Charms launched in 1964 with its magically delicious marshmallows. The first cereal to successfully add candy pieces, actual candy, to breakfast. General Mills had tested the concept for years, trying different shapes, flavors, colors. They discovered that children would eat around the grain pieces, saving the marshmallows for last, creating a reward system within the bowl. Breakfast became a treasure hunt. The sugar content kept climbing. By 1965, some cereals were over 50% sugar by weight, higher than many candy bars. But the boxes still claimed nutritional benefits. Part of a complete breakfast, shown with toast, juice, milk, fruit. Of course the cereal was nutritious when you ate it with actually nutritious foods. That's like saying candy is healthy if you eat it with vegetables. Scientists were beginning to understand what was happening in children's brains. The combination of sugar, cartoon stimulation, and reward anticipation created powerful neural pathways. Dr. Frederick Stare of Harvard, who was later revealed to have been paid by cereal companies, published studies claiming sugar was harmless, essential even, for children's energy. Other researchers disagreed, but their voices were drowned out by Saturday morning jingles. Fruit Loops appeared in 1963. Toucan Sam Following Your Nose, Apple Jacks in 1965, Honeycomb in 1965, each with distinct characters, unique selling propositions, carefully crafted psychological hooks. The cereal aisle became a gallery of cartoon faces, all making eye contact with children, all promising adventure, excitement, belonging. The marketing worked beyond anyone's wildest expectations. By 1970, American children were consuming an average of 25 pounds of cereal per year, up from less than 5 pounds in 1945. The breakfast table had become a battlefield, parents versus children, nutrition versus desire. And the cereals were winning. They had the best weapons, the catchiest songs, the coolest characters. Some parents fought back, forming groups like Action for Children's Television, demanding regulations, limits on sugar, restrictions on advertising. The cereal companies responded by adding vitamins, lots of vitamins, fortified with 8 essential vitamins, as if vitamins somehow negated the sugar. like adding vitamins to cigarettes and calling them healthy. But here's the darkest part. Internal memos from the period, uncovered decades later, show that companies knew exactly what they were doing. They had research on sugar addiction, on childhood obesity, on dental decay. They knew, and they kept pushing, kept innovating, kept finding new ways to make children want their products, need their products. The mascots became so powerful that children would cry if their parents bought the wrong brand. Grocery stores reported tantrums, meltdowns, even violence over cereal choices. The characters weren't just selling breakfast, they were selling identity. You weren't just eating Frosted Flakes, you were aligned with Tony, part of his team. Without them, you were nobody, just a kid eating boring grown-up food. By the end of the 1960s, the transformation was complete. Cereal wasn't food anymore. It was entertainment, identity, addiction, wrapped in a colorful box. And the next decade would only intensify the assault with new technologies, new characters, and sugar levels that would have horrified even C.W. Post. The vitamin fortification wars began quietly in 1961, when a small cereal company added 100% of daily iron to their flakes. Within 6 months, every major brand was scrambling to add more vitamins than their competitors. It became an arms race of enrichment, with companies treating the nutrition label like a scorecard. The more percentages, the better the sales. The FDA tried to establish guidelines, but the cereal lobby was powerful, impossibly powerful. They argued that fortification was a public service, fighting malnutrition in American children. Never mind that most of these children weren't malnourished, they were oversugared. The vitamins became a shield, deflecting criticism about the actual nutritional disaster happening in those colorful boxes. By 1969, some cereals claimed to provide a full day's nutrition in one bowl. Total Cereal ran ads showing a stack of bowls, claiming you'd need dozens of servings of competitors to match their vitamin content. The commercials conveniently ignored that you could get the same vitamins from a single multivitamin pill without the 40% sugar content. The science behind fortification was questionable at best. Companies added whatever vitamins were cheapest, in whatever amounts looked impressive on the box. Some cereals had 800% of daily riboflavin. Does anyone need 800% of riboflavin? Medical researchers suggest probably not, but it looked fantastic on the packaging. Parents were thoroughly confused. The boxes screamed health benefits. Build strong bodies 12 ways. While their children bounced off walls after breakfast, fueled by sugar rushes that crashed by mid-morning. Teachers reported widespread attention problems in the hours after breakfast, though it would take decades for anyone to officially connect the dots. The government finally acted in 1970. Sort of. The White House Conference on Food, Nutrition, and Health condemned high-sugar cereals. Robert Choate, a nutrition advocate, testified before Congress, holding up boxes of cereal, ranking them by nutritional value. Most of the popular kids' cereals ranked below the cardboard box as they came in. The cereal company's response? Add more vitamins. This period saw the birth of nutritional marketing, the art of making junk food seem healthy through selective truthfulness. Made with whole grain, even if whole grain was the 8th ingredient after various sugars. Good source of fiber. If you ate half the box, low fat, because sugar doesn't contain fat. Technically true, completely misleading. The battles over labeling were fierce. Companies fought every attempt at regulation. When the FDA proposed requiring sugar content on the front of boxes, the industry spent millions lobbying against it. They won. Sugar content stayed buried in the fine print, listed in grams, because who knows what 4 grams of sugar looks like. It's a teaspoon, but the companies weren't going to tell you that. Meanwhile, new healthy cereals emerged to capture concerned parents. Special K promised to help women stay slim. Product 19 sounded scientific, important, like a government project. Wheaties became the breakfast of champions, associated with Olympic athletes who probably ate one bowl for the commercial and never touched it again. The marketing doublespeak reached absurd levels. Life Cereal ran its famous "Mikey Likes It" campaign, suggesting even picky eaters would enjoy their nutritious cereal. The nutrition came from added vitamins. The taste came from sugar, about 20% by weight. But hey, Mikey liked it, and he hated everything, so it must be good. Consumer advocates kept fighting. In 1977, Action for Children's Television petitioned the FTC to ban all advertising to children under 8, arguing that young children couldn't distinguish between content and commercials. The cereal companies mobilized, hiring psychologists to testify that children were sophisticated consumers, capable of making informed choices. About breakfast cereal. At age 5, sure they were. The FTC actually proposed sweeping regulations in 1978, limiting sugar content, restricting advertising, requiring health warnings. The industry response was nuclear. They lobbied Congress directly, threatened to pull advertising from networks that supported the regulations, funded studies showing sugar was harmless, essential for children's brain function. The proposal died, strangled by corporate pressure and political cowardice. But something interesting was happening in the marketplace. A small counterculture movement was embracing natural cereals. Granola made a comeback, this time with hippie credentials instead of sanitarium origins. Small companies started producing unsweetened, organic, whole grain cereals, sold in health food stores, marketed to people who probably grew their own wheat. The major companies noticed and did what they always did. They co-opted the movement. Natural versions of popular cereals appeared with slightly less sugar, fewer artificial colors, more visible grains. They cost more, significantly more, because health was now a premium product. The same companies selling sugar bombs to poor kids were selling wholesome alternatives to wealthy parents. Quaker Oats launched Life and Captain Crunch's Crunch Berries the same year. 1972, one marketed as nutritious family breakfast, the other as colorful sugar delivery system. Same company, same factories, same basic ingredients, different audiences, different prices, different moral implications. The nutrition label became mandatory in 1973, but companies had learned to game it perfectly. Serving sizes were manipulated to make calories seem reasonable. Sugar was listed under different names: corn syrup, dextrose, maltose, fructose, spreading it out so no single sugar topped the ingredient list. A single cereal might contain 5 different sugars, but each one listed separately. Schools became battlegrounds. Nutritionists tried to educate children about healthy eating, while vending machines sold sugar cereals in single-serving boxes. The same schools teaching the food pyramid in health class sold Fruit Loops in the cafeteria. The contradiction was obvious to everyone, except apparently the school boards accepting money from food companies. Research from this period, much of it suppressed or ignored, was already showing connections between high-sugar breakfast and behavioral problems, attention deficits, obesity, dental decay. But the studies that got publicity, the ones that shaped policy, were mysteriously funded by food industry groups, finding no problems whatsoever. By 1979, the average children's cereal was 41% sugar. Some were over 50%, basically candy with added vitamins. The boxes still claimed nutritional superiority, still showed healthy, active children, still promised energy and vitality. What they delivered was diabetes and hyperactivity, but those side effects weren't mentioned in the cheerful jingles. The decade ended with the cereal companies victorious. They defeated every meaningful regulation, turned vitamins into a marketing tool, convinced millions of parents that fortified sugar was somehow healthy. The war wasn't over. Consumer advocates would keep fighting, but the industry had learned how to win, how to use science, politics, and psychology to protect their profits. The American breakfast table was dying, and nobody wanted to admit it. By 1975, only 32% of families ate breakfast together, down from 78% in 1950. Parents left earlier for work. Kids caught buses in darkness. Everyone grabbed whatever they could, whenever they could alone. The ritual of morning gathering had dissolved into individual refueling stops. This isolation created opportunity. Cereal companies realized they didn't need to appeal to mothers anymore. They could target each family member separately, divide and conquer. Dad got his grape nuts. Mom got her Special K. Teenagers got their Frosted Flakes. Little kids got their Lucky Charms. For different boxes, for different price points, 4 times the profit. The invention of the breakfast bar in 1975 was inevitable. Carnation breakfast bars promised the nutrition of a complete breakfast in a wrapper. No bowl, no spoon, no table required. You could eat breakfast while driving, walking, running for the train. The bar was essentially compressed cereal with extra sugar, marketed as a time-saving miracle. Some nutritionists called it the death of breakfast. Others just shrugged. Progress was progress. Pop-Tarts had already paved the way, invented in 1964, but reaching peak popularity in the mid-70s. Kellogg's marketed them as breakfast pastries, which sounded better than flat cookies you heat up. They came unfrosted initially, but by 1975, the frosted versions outsold plain 3-1, because apparently, even pastries pretending to be breakfast needed more sugar. The microwave revolution changed everything again. By 1978, 30% of American homes had microwaves. Instant oatmeal became actually instant. Just add water, 90 seconds, done. Quaker sold individual packets with adorable names: maple and brown sugar, cinnamon and spice. Each packet contained about 4 teaspoons of sugar, but who was counting? The convenience was intoxicating. Working mothers bore the blame and the burden. Magazine articles questioned whether latchkey children could handle breakfast alone, while simultaneously advertising cereals kids could pour themselves. The mixed messages were deafening. Be a good mother, provide nutrition, but also, here's candy your kid can eat unsupervised. The term breakfast of champions became ironic. Champions didn't eat Wheaties. They ate carefully calibrated protein shakes, specific carbohydrate ratios, timed nutrition windows. But the myth persisted on the box. Bruce Jenner's face smiling next to promises of athletic greatness. Just add milk, become Olympic athlete. Simple as that. Schools tried to help with breakfast programs, starting in 1975 as permanent federal policy. But what did they serve? Cereal, individual boxes, the same sugar bombs parents were trying to avoid. Apple Jacks in the classroom, Fruit Loops in the cafeteria. The government essentially became a cereal distributor, using tax dollars to buy sugar to feed to children who couldn't concentrate in class because they'd eaten sugar for breakfast. The portable breakfast trend accelerated through the 80s. Cereal in a cup, cereal in a bag, cereal pressed into bar form, cookie form, drink form. Anything to avoid sitting down, using a bowl, taking 5 minutes to eat. Americans were too busy for breakfast, but somehow had time for the inevitable sugar crash at 10:30. Remember those sanitarium patients from Section 2, sitting at long tables, chewing each bite 32 times? By 1985, the average American breakfast lasted 4 minutes. Most of it spent scrolling through TV channels, looking for cartoons that advertised more cereal. The irony would have killed John Harvey Kellogg if he hadn't already died in 1943. General Mills introduced clusters in 1972. Honey Nut Cheerios in 1979. Cookie Crisp in 1977. Literally miniature cookies for breakfast. They didn't even pretend anymore. The tagline was cookies for breakfast. as if that was something to celebrate. Parents surrendered, exhausted, defeated. At least the kids were eating something. The coffee shop explosion started changing adult breakfast habits. Starbucks had only 6 stores in 1984, but the trend was beginning. Adults wanted out too. They wanted someone else to make their breakfast, serve it in a paper cup, let them pretend they were too important, too busy, too sophisticated for cereal. Meanwhile, cereal companies kept innovating for the home market. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cereal, Ghostbusters cereal, Batman cereal. Every movie, every cartoon, every trend got a cereal. Most lasted less than a year, long enough to cash in, disappear, leave kids begging for something that no longer existed. The milk problem became a serious concern. Kids would eat dry cereal as snacks, handfuls straight from the box, watching TV, doing homework, playing video games. Cereal had transcended breakfast entirely. It was just another snack food, like chips or cookies, but somehow still claiming nutritional superiority. Market research from 1988 revealed something disturbing. Children recognized cereal mascots better than historical figures. Tony the Tiger had higher name recognition than George Washington. The Trix Rabbit was more familiar than Abraham Lincoln. Captain Crunch outranked actual military heroes. Corporate characters had colonized children's minds more effectively than education ever could. The single-serving trend reached absurd peaks. Cereal companies sold individual bowls, with cereal sealed in the bottom, milk powder in the lid, just add water. Astronaut food for earthbound kids. The packaging cost more than the contents, created mountains of waste, but convenience conquered all concerns. Some families tried to resist, buying generic cereals, store brands in bags instead of boxes. Same sugar, same shapes, half the price, no mascots. Kids revolted. They wanted the box, the character, the prize, the identity. Eating generic cereal was social suicide in the lunchroom hierarchy. By decade's end, the transformation was complete. Breakfast had atomized from family ritual to individual consumption event. The table was empty. The TV was on. Everyone ate alone, grabbed something portable, disappeared into their separate days. The companies had won by destroying the very meal they claimed to celebrate. But strange things were happening in health food stores. Ancient grains were appearing, quinoa, amaranth, spelled. Words nobody could pronounce, selling for prices nobody could believe. A counter-revolution was brewing, quietly, expensively, exclusively. The privileged were about to discover what the poor had always known. Simple food was better if you could afford it. The granola renaissance started in Berkeley, naturally. In 1972, a small health food store began selling homemade granola, actual homemade, stirred in someone's kitchen, baked in a residential oven. Nothing like Kellogg's rock-hard 19th century version. This was sweet, crunchy, full of honey and oil. ironically containing more calories than most unhealthy cereals, but it felt virtuous and feeling was everything. The counterculture embraced granola like a religion. It represented rejection of corporate food, industrial agriculture, the entire capitalist breakfast complex. Never mind that the oats still came from large farms, the honey from commercial apiaries, the packaging from the same factories. The symbolism mattered more than supply chains. Eating granola meant you were enlightened, aware, different from the masses munching their frosted flakes. By 1974, even General Mills wanted in. They launched Nature Valley Granola, trying to capture hippie authenticity in a mass-produced box. The packaging featured mountains, streams, sunset colors, everything except actual nature. The ingredients were basically the same as their other cereals: oats, sugar, oil, just arranged differently, marketed to different anxieties. The organic movement complicated everything. Suddenly, regular cereals weren't just unhealthy, they were poisoned. Pesticides, preservatives, artificial everything. Parents who'd grown up on sugar smacks now demanded purity for their children. The same generation that had begged for prizes in cereal boxes now insisted on ingredients they could pronounce. Cashy appeared in 1984, founded by a couple in La Jolla. They mixed 7 whole grains and sesame, called it 7 whole grains on a mission. The mission was never quite clear, but it sounded important, purposeful, like eating breakfast could save the world. The cereal tasted like cardboard, early customers admitted, but virtuous cardboard. The major companies scrambled to appear healthy. Cheerios had always been relatively plain, so General Mills repositioned them as heart-healthy, commissioning studies, funding research, until they could legally claim Cheerios reduces cholesterol. The fact that any whole grain would do the same thing, well, that wasn't mentioned in the advertisements. Mucilix arrived from Europe in 1985, bringing continental sophistication to American breakfast tables. It was basically granola without the honey, but the foreign name made it exotic, worth paying 3 times more than domestic cereal. Americans who couldn't pronounce it correctly, Mulex, Muzzle9, still bought it because confusion seemed cultured. The fiber obsession of the late 80s changed everything again. Suddenly bran was magical. Fiber One launched in 1985 with 14 grams per serving, enough to cause serious digestive distress if you weren't careful. People forced themselves to eat it, pretending to enjoy what tasted like sweetened twigs, because fiber was the new vitamin C, the new protein, the new solution to everything. Cascadian Farm started in 1972 as an actual farm, a hippie commune in Washington state. By 1990, they were selling organic cereals nationwide. The founder had gone from living in a tent to running a multi-million-dollar business. The cereals cost 4 times more than conventional brands, but they came with a story, a narrative, a connection to the earth that justified the price. the supplement industry noticed breakfast's vulnerability. Why eat fortified cereal when you could take pills? Meal replacement shakes appeared. Slim fast. And sure, Carnation Instant Breakfast, promising complete nutrition in a can. No chewing required, barely any taste, just efficiency. The logical endpoint of American breakfast evolution, food reduced to its absolute minimum. Meanwhile, in Vermont, a couple started making granola in their bakery. They called it Bare Naked, sold it at ski resorts to tourists who associated Vermont with purity, maple syrup, authentic American wholesomeness. The granola contained more sugar than Lucky Charms, but it came in a brown bag, had a story about bears, felt like you were eating something real. The cereal aisles split into two distinct sections. Regular cereals on one side, colorful, loud, desperate. Natural cereals on the other, beige, quiet, expensive. Parents stood between them, calculating, compromising, buying both. Honey Nut Cheerios for the kids, organic spelt flakes for themselves. Peace through segregation. Barbara's Bakery emerged in 1971, making Puffin's cereal. They looked like Kix, tasted like Kix, cost 3 times more than Kix. But they were natural, sold in health food stores, had a penguin on the box instead of a cartoon character. Though honestly, what's the difference between a penguin mascot and a tiger? Both are animals selling grain. The ingredients arms race intensified. Ancient grains became selling points. Amaranth, quinoa, kamut, teff. Words that sounded like spells, promising mystical nutrition from forgotten civilizations. The Aztecs ate amaranth, the Incas ate quinoa, and look how well things turned out for them. Wait, actually, never mind that part. Whole Foods opened its first store in 1980, creating a temple to expensive eating. The cereal aisle was a monument to choice. 40 types of granola, 30 varieties of muesli, organic versions of everything. The prices were astronomical, but shopping there felt like an accomplishment, a moral victory. You weren't just buying breakfast, you were voting with your dollars, supporting farmers, saving the planet, one $8 box at a time. The science was confusing, contradictory, possibly corrupted. Studies showed organic cereals were nutritionally identical to conventional ones. Other studies disagreed. Some research found pesticide residues dangerous. Other research called them harmless. Parents didn't know what to believe, so they bought whatever made them feel less guilty. By 1999, the natural cereal market was worth $2 billion. The mainstream companies had all launched organic lines or bought organic companies. General Mills bought Cascadian Farm. Kellogg bought Kashi. The hippies had won or lost, depending on how you looked at it. Their revolution had been purchased, incorporated, made safe for supermarket shelves. The irony was delicious. The granola that symbolized rebellion against corporate cereal was now made by the same corporations in the same factories, just on different production lines. The only difference was the packaging, the price, and the feeling of superiority that came with every spoonful. But something else was happening. Scientists were beginning to understand the addiction mechanics, the neurological pathways, the evolutionary mismatch between our brains and processed food. The next decade would bring revelations about sugar, inflammation, gut bacteria. Everything we thought we knew about breakfast was about to be questioned again. The science finally caught up in 2005 when researchers at Yale published what everyone already suspected. Breakfast cereals were programming children's brains. The study showed that sugar activated the same reward centers as addictive drugs, dopamine flooding neural pathways, creating cravings that could last decades. Tony the Tiger wasn't just selling cereal, he was dealing sugar to developing minds. But knowing and changing are different things entirely. By 2010, despite all the research, all the warnings, all the organic alternatives, Americans still bought 2.7 billion boxes of cereal annually. The top sellers? The same sugar bombs from the 60s. Frosted Flakes, Lucky Charms, Fruit Loops, Honey Nut Cheerios. We knew better, ate them anyway, fed them to our children while reading articles about childhood obesity. The nostalgia factor had become unstoppable. Millennials who grew up on Saturday morning cartoons and cereal now had their own kids. They bought the same brands they'd eaten, not for nutrition, but for memory. That first bite of Captain Crunch transported them back to pajamas and cartoons, simpler times, before mortgages and diagnoses and everything else adulthood brought. Cereal companies understood this perfectly. They started releasing retro editions, bringing back discontinued cereals from the 80s and 90s. French Toast Crunch returned in 2014 after massive online campaigns. Surge Soda came back. Dunkaroos reappeared. The past was profitable, especially a past coated in sugar and viewed through rose-colored glasses. The cereal cafe phenomenon started in London, spread to New York, Los Angeles, Tokyo. Restaurants serving nothing but cereal, hundreds of varieties, exotic milk options, toppings bars. $20 for a bowl of Cocoa Puffs, served ironically, nostalgically, desperately. Adults eating children's food in public, pretending it was clever, not sad. Social media changed everything again. Instagram made breakfast performative. Smoothie bowls replaced cereal bowls, arranged like art, photographed, filtered, shared. The actual eating became secondary to the documentation. Acai bowls that cost $15 took 20 minutes to arrange, 5 minutes to photograph, 2 minutes to eat. Progress. Meanwhile, cereal sales started declining, really declining, down 20% between 2009 and 2019. Millennials didn't eat breakfast, or they ate avocado toast, or protein bars, or nothing. The ritual of bowl and spoon seemed antiquated, required dishes, cleanup, sitting still. Everything modern life had trained them to avoid. The companies panicked. tried everything. Cereal in pouches for eating while walking. Cereal mixed with yogurt. Cereal as ice cream topping. Midnight snack. Party mix. They partnered with coffee shops, food trucks, delivery apps. Anything to remain relevant, to avoid becoming what they'd always been. Processed grain in a box. Research from 2015 revealed the darkest truth. The average American child consumed 22 pounds of sugar annually just from breakfast cereal. That's before counting juice, syrup, jam, everything else on the morning table. We created a generation literally addicted to sugar before they could tie their shoes. And we'd done it knowingly, willingly, because mornings were hard and sugar made them easier. The gut microbiome research added another layer of horror. These processed grains, stripped of fiber, loaded with sugar, were destroying beneficial bacteria, promoting inflammation, potentially contributing to everything from depression to autoimmune diseases. The cheerful bowls of our childhood might have been slowly poisoning us. But the research was complex, contested, easy to ignore. Kellogg's tried rebranding in 2018, removing cartoon characters from some boxes, reducing sugar in others, adding protein, probiotics, ancient grains. Sales continued falling. Children didn't recognize cereals without mascots. Adults had moved on. The company that had invented breakfast cereal was watching it die. General Mills fought back with nostalgia marketing. Limited edition flavors. Chocolate Toast Crunch. Maple Cheerios. Birthday Cake Cookie Crisp. Each more desperate than the last. Like a fading rock star adding synthesizers, trying to stay relevant, missing the point entirely. The world had changed. Breakfast had evolved or devolved, depending on your perspective. The pandemic briefly revived cereal sales. Stuck at home, anxious, regressing, people bought comfort food. Cereal sales jumped 18% in March 2020. We were scared children again, wanting familiar tastes, reliable pleasures, something that hadn't changed since we were small, even if we knew it was killing us slowly. But even nostalgia has limits. Generation Z barely eats cereal. They grew up with warnings, alternatives, awareness. To them, cereal is what old people eat, like TV dinners or casseroles. An artifact from a time when people believed corporations, trusted advertising, thought vitamins could offset sugar. The final irony is perfect. Battle Creek, the birthplace of breakfast cereal, now has an obesity rate of 38%, higher than the national average. The city that gave America cornflakes, that promised health through proper eating, is sick, diabetic, dying. The sanitarium is long closed, converted to federal offices. The factories mostly shuttered. The revolution eaten by its own success. Yet we still reach for those boxes. Still feel that Pavlovian response to the rustle of plastic bags, the tinkle of flakes hitting ceramic, the specific softening texture as milk penetrates each piece. We know it's not food, not really. It's engineered pleasure, childhood memory, Morning ritual. A substitute for the family breakfast we don't have time for. The nutrition we know we need. The connection we've lost. The addiction isn't really to sugar or crunch or even convenience. It's to the promise cereals have always sold. That breakfast can be simple. That mornings can be easy. That a box from the store can provide what we're missing: energy, happiness, belonging, health. Even though we have always known, it's just processed grain and sugar and a cartoon tiger who's been lying to us, greatly, for 70 years. John Harvey Kellogg wanted to suppress human desire. His brother wanted to satisfy it. C.W. Post wanted to exploit it. They all succeeded and failed simultaneously, creating an industry worth billions, a cultural institution, a public health crisis, and a peculiar American tradition of starting each day with a bowl of sweet denial. The future of cereal is uncertain. Sales keep dropping. Companies keep merging, innovating, desperately iterating. But every morning, in millions of homes, someone still pours milk over processed grain, adds sugar they know they shouldn't, feeds their children food they know isn't food. Because that's what we do. That's what we've always done. Since a couple of brothers in Battle Creek accidentally invented the perfect delivery system for the only drug we give to children and call it breakfast. And here we are at the end of our strange journey through America's breakfast bowls. You've traveled from Victorian sanitariums to modern Instagram feeds, from religious dietary restrictions to cartoon-induced sugar addictions, from the Kellogg brothers' bitter rivalry to your own kitchen cabinet, where those colorful boxes still wait. The night is settling in now, and perhaps you're thinking about your own breakfast memories. That specific cereal you haven't tasted in decades, but can still recall perfectly. The way the milk turned colors. The particular sogginess of frosted flakes after exactly 3 minutes. These aren't just memories. They're neurological imprints, carved deep when your brain was still forming. Let your breathing slow a little. Feel how your body is beginning to relax, sinking slightly into wherever you're resting. The story of cereal is really the story of America, convenience conquering nutrition, marketing defeating medicine, nostalgia overwhelming knowledge. It's not a particularly heroic tale, but it's ours. Your eyelids might be feeling heavier now. That's perfectly fine. Let them rest. The cereal aisles will still be there tomorrow, unchanged, unchanging. Those same mascots smiling, those same promises printed, those same lies we tell ourselves about breakfast being the most important meal. The room around you is quiet, or should be. Let any remaining sounds fade into background texture, like the white noise of cereal hitting a bowl, a sound so ordinary, yet somehow comforting, even now, even knowing everything you know. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Picture those early sanitarium patients, eating their wheat flakes in silence, believing they were becoming pure. Then see the children of the 50s, watching Tony the Tiger, believing they were becoming great. The beliefs change, the behavior remains. Your breathing is deeper now, slower, more rhythmic, like the mechanical horses at Kellogg's Sanitarium, moving without going anywhere. But the motion itself becomes soothing, repetitive, hypnotic. Let that rhythm carry you, away from conscious thought, away from tomorrow's breakfast choices. Somewhere in Battle Creek tonight, the streets are empty. The old sanitarium building stands in darkness. The city that changed American breakfast sleeps, unaware of its legacy, unburdened by its history. You don't need to think about it either. Not tonight. Let all those questions about nutrition, addiction, corporate manipulation just dissolve, like cereal and milk, losing their structure, becoming something softer, easier to forget. Feel how heavy your body has become, how comfortable, how ready for sleep. The story is ending, has ended. Let yourself drift now, like grain dust settling in a factory, like sugar dissolving in warm milk, like consciousness fading into dream. Sleep is coming now, can you feel it? That gentle weight pulling you down, down, away from thoughts of breakfast, away from memories of childhood, away from everything except this quiet moment, this soft darkness, this gradual letting go. Just silence now and rest and maybe, if you're lucky, dreams that taste nothing like cereal. Dreams beyond the colorful boxes, beyond the cheerful lies, beyond the morning ritual. Good night now. Sleep well. And maybe tomorrow, just maybe, you'll have eggs instead.